A warm welcome to everyone to today's information webinar on the Horizon call de-risking renewable fuel technologies through transnational pre-commercial procurement of renewable fuel industrial value chains. You can take the next slide, please. Today's webinar will present the upcoming Horizon Europe call and its objectives. It will be the starting point to facilitate networking and matchmaking among interested organizations and support the establishment of a strong multi-county buyers group for renewable fuel deployment across Europe. And the target audience is mainly public buyers, contracting authorities, and other interested stakeholders. You can take the next slide, please. So the agenda for today is that we will get an introduction and the presentation of the call by Maria Giorgio from the European Commission. And after that, we will go into legal aspects of this specific call topic presented by Lieve Boos, a Policy Officer for Innovation, Procurement, Experimentation Space from DG RTD, also from the European Commission. And after that, we will have a question and answer session. Just before we get started, please show the next slide. We would also like to invite you, if you want to, after this information webinar, to be part of building or further research if you want to be part of a multi-country buyers group for this call topic. To express your interest, you can just scan this QR code to participate in weekly mobilization and matchmaking activity. It will be held every Monday from 10 o'clock and starting on the 29th of June. And the first event will be hosted by Best and Dina from Best. I don't know if you want to say some short words about this first matchmaking and mobilization session next week.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. So yes, Anna and I will be hosting these sessions alternating, and I will host the next one next week. So the intention is that we give you room for discussing the call and discussing how to react to the call. And thus we would like to invite you to come, bring your topics, your questions. We will decide on the spot which specific questions to discuss and send people into smaller breakout groups. So enabling very detailed discussions, because in a smaller group it's easier to discuss. So please just scan the code and register yourself, and hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Perfect. Then we move on to the first presentation, the introduction of the call topic by Maria Giorgio from the European Commission.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anna, Dina, for inviting me to this webinar. This is a particularly interesting call for the area of renewable fuel technologies and their deployment. My name is Maria Georgiadou. I work in the European Commission DG Research and Innovation, and I'm the responsible person for the strategy and the implementation of the strategies in topics in work programs of research and innovation framework programs. So, for this topic, I would like to start saying that it is, as an action, a pre-commercial procurement. The overall budget is 40 million, and one project is for a sink that will consume the whole 40 million. What is the reason of setting this topic? The reason is that transport decarbonization will depend on renewable fuels now and in the medium and longer term. There are difficult to electrify transport sectors, as we all know. So there is a lack in deployment of advanced and innovative technologies of renewable fuels. Until now, under the Research and Innovation Framework programs, we have continuously and consistently supported the technologies and the maturing of the technologies from both biological and non-biological origin. And what it still remains as challenges are these high capital and operational costs, their supply chain uncertainties, and their regulatory complexities. So the topic here comes in order to assist the de-risking of essential renewable fuel technologies, essential in terms that they can contribute to domestic commercial fuel production towards 2030 and beyond, but not just produce the volumes, also produce them in a cost-effective way. So it's a topic helping to overcome the valley of death and move from the technology maturing to the technology first deployment. Also, it is expected to lower the cost, as I said, of the de-risking. How this can be done? By engaging at the same time competing solution suppliers and technology providers in parallel. Also, it is expected that it will boost the transnational public and private investments in this process of de-risking, attract new players to tackle any supplier lock-in issues, open the market opportunities for researchers and industry that are active in Europe, and also, among others, create benefits for the public authorities, the policy makers, the industry, the technology providers, and the energy producers and consumers, and also support what we have as an action between member states and Commission under the Strategic Energy Technology Plan on renewable fuels and bioenergy, Action 8, and also help with the permitting procedures acceleration, increase the public acceptance in these innovative and sustainable renewable fuel projects. And in overall, it is expected to really push for the towards the scaling up of de-risked the technologies of renewable fuels. Next slide, please. The scope, next. The scope of this topic is, as I said, to issue a pre-commercial procurement of research and development, validation, and possibly first deployment of these industrial value chains of essential renewable fuel technologies. This should be done on a competitive development in phases, and this should include entire industrial value chains. They should not start from scratch. They should build upon existing knowledge on technology and value chain readiness, and this should be based on existing knowledge from EU projects and existing knowledge from RTD studies. Usually we did two studies, one on the development of the outlook of these industrial renewable fuel value chains, and another on the mobilization. And there is a list of essential industrial value chains and business models and the explanation why and how these business models are considered of technologies are considered essential for the decarbonization of transport. An example here, we list some of these value chains would be the production of advanced bioethanol and further processing of this into alcohol-to-jet synthetic paraffinic kerosene. It could be the biomass gasification and Fischer-Tropsch synthesis to produce Fischer-Tropsch synthetic paraffinic kerosene. Could be production of biomethanol and further processing of methanol to jet. It could be hydrotreatment of lipids from marginal and contaminated lands. So this is the entire value chain here to produce HEFA for planes. It could be biomass pyrolysis and upgrading or co-processing to produce biokerosene and heavy fuel oil. Also biomethane from anaerobic digestion and gasification and methanation to produce biomethane for shipping, or further processing that to methanol for shipping. and also it could be e-methanol production from carbon dioxide and renewable hydrogen also for shipping purposes. But besides this could be other that can be proven to come to pre-commercial stage before the end or at the end of the project actually. So the pre-commercial procurement should be of services that will design and bring by the action and these industrial value chains of renewable fuel technologies at TRL8. And they should be based on domestic, and this is extremely important, domestic sustainable feedstocks, because this topic aims at domestic production of essential volumes of these renewable fuel technologies. They should create synergies across all end users in energy and transport for markets and production facilities. It could mean that more products are produced in the same facility and for use in many sectors. Another important point is that the proposal should make aware the research and development providers on how to increase their investment capacity. And this should be through possible combinations of the PCP contract with additional union support for companies, for example, through the InvestEU, through the regional funds, through the EAC, or other. And in the final slide, I would like to say a few things on the implementation. So the proposal, first of all, should develop, or the project should develop a plan for deployment of successful solutions, either through deploying some of them with a combination of the PCP contract and the other funding sources in the project, or after. By preparing a deliverable, preparing a follow-up procurement to purchase such solutions of a larger volume after the PCP. And a clarification here, when we are talking of renewable fuels, they are always synthetic fuels, meaning that they are hydrocarbons. It is not plain hydrogen, so it could be both of biological and non-biological origin, but hydrogen production as an end product in this topic is not in scope. For the implementation, as I said, we foresee one project that should develop and implement the pre-commercial procurement of the R&D services from several providers that are established in any EU MSAC and across national borders, which is encouraged. It doesn't mean that only the countries that participate in the procurement as transnational buyers would be eligible for financing as an R&D provider. Any country and across national borders, collaboration is encouraged. So procurements, who could be the procurements? Contracting entities that are primarily concerned for using fuels as energy supply and energy use to decarbonize the transport. And they also are interested to take off scaling up these solutions in this area of public interest. So transnational buyers could be at least 2 public procurers from different MSACs, plus possibly 1 or more private procurers that provide similar services of public interest. For example, we could have EU airports and port authorities and their respective managing bodies. We could have aircraft operators and shipping companies, other state, national, regional, local contracting authorities and bodies that are governed by public law or their associations. And you may be very well aware that there is an obligation to fuel suppliers and airports, for example, in buying and providing for the airplanes, providing these volumes of renewable kerosene. So this is what we have in mind as transnational procurers and buyers in this case. There will be one joint call for tender to buy on a competitive basis these R&D services, one evaluation of offers, and a lead procurer that will award the contracts and will be designated in this consortium. participation of public contracting authorities and entities that are managing funds or they fund also regional funds, for example, is also encouraged for this combination of the PCP contract with other sources of EU funding. That's all for me. This is the overall idea and the scope and the details and the implementation requirements for the topic. And now, thank you very much for your attention. And we'll leave the floor to Liv, who is the legal expert in RTD, responsible for the PCPs, and will give her presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maria. Sorry, Liv, before you start, just a quick reminder to all the participants to please kindly use the questions and answer panel in Zoom to post your questions to the speakers. Thank you. Liv, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm Liv Bos. I'm working in the Innovation Policy and Access to Finance unit in DG Research and Innovation in the European Commission. And I'm working on innovation procurement mainly. So I'll try to explain you better how do these pre-commercial procurements projects really work, also from a legal point of view. So this is probably what you all know best if you haven't worked with a pre-commercial procurement yet. Normal public procurements where from time to time you buy something which you haven't deployed yet for the past 20 years, but an innovative solution. So we have also calls for procurements of innovative solutions, but just to explain, this call is not focusing on this. What are the public procurements of innovative solutions? These are cases where we use normal public procurements to buy a solution that is almost on the market or already in the market in small quantities, but is not meeting exactly yet the requirements for large-scale deployment. But there is no need for research and development, testing, etc. anymore. In fact, the solutions are ready. The demand isn't there yet. That's the problem. So if only the public buyers create sufficient demand, the suppliers would do the effort to bring the solutions to the market. But this is what we're not doing in this call. So if we go to the next slide and you see what we're actually going to do, this call is a call for pre-commercial procurement. So what is the difference then with the previous slide? Is that here we are in a situation where there is still a need for research and development to get solutions developed, to get technologies or different solution approaches de-risked, to compare different ones that different vendors are working on, because none of them has been actually fully validated yet. So it's still too risky for public buyers to commit to go for large-scale deployment, to put on the table big budgets for that, as they cannot really know yet what will be the best way of working or how to actually phrase the final requirements for a large-scale deployment contract. So it's also too risky then to tie your hands to one specific solution approach or one specific supplier. That's why in pre-commercial procurement, we work always with multiple sourcing. We give public R&D procurement contracts to more than one vendor so that they can show how their different approaches work and the buyer can actually compare them and test them and see their comparative advantages and disadvantages. You may also need pre-commercial procurements when you're in a situation where you need to attract new players, new vendors to the market, because your current market is one where you are locked in to certain specific vendors, and this creates issues often for public buyers in terms of solutions getting too expensive, innovation cycles being too slow. So if you're in such a situation, pre-commercial procurement may also help, because there the multiple sourcing again gives you the opportunity to give more contracts than the amount of current suppliers that are available on the market today, so that new suppliers can come in and also show what they're able to do with their new solutions. So what are you then actually buying when you do a pre-commercial procurement? You buy research and development services, and that gives you the chance to steer also this development to your needs as a public buyer. Because you're procuring, so you can write down any requirement that you have in your tender specifications. What the solutions are supposed to do, what functionalities, performance levels they need to obtain, but also how the research and development needs to happen, where testing needs to happen, etc. So you can steer this whole process so that you can really check whether the solutions will finally meet your real requirements. But it's also a way to collect information about what are the pros and cons of different solutions of different suppliers, so that afterwards, once the pre-commercial procurement is finished and you want to really go now for really large-scale deployment, you have all this information to make your tender specifications for large-scale deployment with the full knowledge of all these pros and cons. You will then also have a competitive supply base because in the pre-commercial procurement, you created this multiple sourcing with multiple vendors that are actually having developed and tested solutions. Another characteristic of pre-commercial procurement is that it works in phases. It doesn't give the whole research and development contract right away to a vendor or to several vendors. It works in phases. So after critical milestones, for example, after design, after prototyping, after rounds of testing, the public buyer can evaluate, have all the solutions that have been funding, have they actually all been feasible? Or do I have to conclude that some of them are not actually technically feasible anymore? Or cost-wise, they would go into astronomical costs, also not feasible anymore. Then he can stop working with those solutions that are not feasible anymore and only continue with those that still are. So that's also a risk reduction factor. Another thing characteristic of pre-commercial procurement is that it shares the risks and benefits of the R&D. What does that mean? It means that the public buyer does not keep all the intellectual property rights of the research and development for himself, but he leaves the ownership of the intellectual property rights with the suppliers. If they create a great idea during the research and development, the suppliers can go and protect this with a patent on their own name so that they will be able to commercialize this great solution also to other customers afterwards. The benefit of that is, of course, that prices will go down over time when suppliers can commercialize and build solutions, produce them at larger scale. So all public buyers on the market will benefit from that. But we'll come back later more in detail on what are then the rights that the public buyer still has, because of course he also needs to be sure that he can run his operations afterwards. He is not giving away all IPR related rights to suppliers. Let's continue first with the next slide. There you see this a bit more graphically. So how does pre-commercial procurement work? Before we start procuring in every European funded project, we ask the public buyers to do first a market consultation, because we're going to buy innovative things, development of innovative things. So you don't always know as public buyer everything that suppliers are working on. That's why public buyers in our EU-funded projects first consult the market to have a good idea of what are ongoing product developments, to present them also, hey, this is what we need. That's our project focus that we're going to work on. We would like to achieve that in that time frame, with that kind of budget, with that kind of requirements. Is that even feasible? Yes, no, you get feedback from the market, and then you can adapt your tender specifications and launch a pre-commercial procurement that actually makes sense and that the market can respond to. Then you launch your pre-commercial procurement. You can decide how many phases you want to have in it. Here the picture shows 3, but you could also have 2 or 4 or 5. It's up to you. And you work with multiple vendors, like we said. You're giving multiple R&D contracts in parallel to competing vendors or consortia of tenderers. It could be not only companies in this consortia, it could also be universities, for example, or other entities participating, but they are competing. They're doing research and development. Like we mentioned, after specific milestones defined by the procurer, they check the feasibility. Those that are not feasible anymore, they stop, and with the others, they continue. And that's why you see that the number of consortia or suppliers is being reduced during the pre-commercial procurement across the different phases, until at the end you have a number of suppliers which have really developed and tested the solution in the field, and where you say, this one really works perfectly, meets all my requirements. Then you can even during the project already also deploy a limited volume of those resulting solutions. Afterwards, if you say, okay, I want to have more of them, this limited volume was not enough, you can always still do afterwards a larger scale procurement, a public procurement of innovative solutions, as we call it, to really deploy large commercial volumes of the solutions. But then why do we split them in two? Maybe you ask yourself, why don't you just do everything in one project? Because if we split them in two, the whole pre-commercial procurement, the whole research, development, and deployment of the limited amount of solutions doesn't fall under our international procurement agreements with other parts of the world, and doesn't fall under the current EU public procurement directives either, which means, first of all, we can run these pre-commercial procurements in a more flexible way, which is good for R&D projects because they're kind of unpredictable and you need some flexibility sometimes. And also we don't need to open up these pre-commercial procurements to every country in the world with whom we have a trade agreement. Only to those countries with whom we have actually trade agreements that open up their procurements of R&D services to each other. And those are limited amount of countries. And in the Horizon Europe context, what we ask all the projects to do, all the public buyers to do, is to open at minimum their pre-commercial procurements to tenderers from, of course, the EU member states, but also all associated countries that are associated to the Horizon Europe program. Opening the procurement to wider countries, wider set of tenders from other countries in the world is not mandatory. According to the rules of Horizon Europe. So we do not require you to open your pre-commercial procurements to vendors from the United States or China or those kind of countries. But if, of course, you do not find sufficient suppliers that are able to do the R&D work in the member states and associated countries, you could still decide to do that as public buyers. But just so that you know, you're not obliged to do it according to our Horizon Europe rules. This kind of feedback of which suppliers are able to perform the work is also something you can figure out during the open market consultation. That's why it's so interesting also to do an open market consultation. If we go to the next slide, here are some more legal points, but I'll try to explain them in a simple way. How do we ensure that these pre-commercial procurements are actually opening, themselves to innovative solutions and to small companies? Because traditional public procurements, they have the reputation of not being very innovation friendly and not being very small company friendly. So in pre-commercial procurements, we do extra efforts to make sure that they are actually innovation friendly and even startup mini company friendly. What helps us to do that? The open market consultation is already one thing, because it alerts everybody on the market much more in advance about what's coming, so that companies, including small ones, can prepare themselves and can start, if they're not able to do all the work on their own, form consortia, make connections with others with whom they might possibly want to make an offer together. We also require public buyers to do wide publication and promotion of this open market consultation and of the call for tenders that will follow later, so that companies from all over the member states and associated countries at least will know that this is happening and that this is an interesting opportunity for them to bid for. We give also sufficient time to tenderers to make offers, more time than the minimum amount of time that is typically required for public procurements, for standard public procurements in our European public procurement rules. Tenderers get 2 months the time to make offers. That also helps for innovative solutions, which are more complex, to create good quality offers. Then we ask public buyers also, when they start writing their tender documents, to make sure that they do not use selection criteria that will disqualify companies because the requirements that they ask there are disproportionate. What are examples of that? Financial requirements are often disproportionate for small companies to meet in procurements of research and development services. Whether you have already a large turnover or not as a company, that is not really a criterion that will determine whether you can actually develop a totally new solution or not. Whether you can provide the procurer a very large financial guarantee or not, or a very large insurance against damages that may occur on the testing field, that also needs to be proportionate to the scale of the project. Because if you ask disproportionately high requirements like that, then they're not anymore scoped towards what the project really is about, and then the smaller companies cannot meet these requirements anymore. The same is about asking selection criteria that ask evidence of, prior customer references, prior projects that have been completed. If you're asking for something totally new to be developed, what is the purpose of asking a prior customer reference on an older previous technology? Does that really help you in selecting the best vendors? So think about how you set your selection criteria to make sure they're not disproportionate. Another thing we ask public buyers to do is to use functional or performance-based requirements. What does that mean? We ask them not to prescribe already the specific solution that needs to be delivered, because then only vendors with that specific solution could make an offer, but to describe in their tender documents what is the problem that needs to be solved, what are the functionalities and the levels of performance that good solutions should have, without prescribing how the actual solution should look like. This way, multiple tenderers with different solution approaches can participate in the project. We already mentioned we use multiple sourcing. So we're not giving in the pre-commercial procurements only one R&D contract to one tenderer, but multiple ones. There is this phasing, as we discussed. This also helps small companies to participate because the first phases are typically smaller in terms of tasks, budget, responsibilities that they need to be able to work with. And then the next phase is prototyping, larger scale field testing require more work, more budget, and then with this phased approach, smaller companies can grow their business during the project while it is ongoing, instead of having to meet all these requirements from the beginning. Intellectual property rights conditions are also more innovation friendly because we leave the ownership of intellectual property rights with companies, as we mentioned. Offers also need to be evaluated not only based on price, but also on the quality of the solutions. So the value for money-based award criteria is what we're asking public buyers to use. And what also helps innovative companies or innovative tenders is that the procurers are not just buying the end solution, they're buying the whole R&D service. So they're monitoring that, steering that throughout the whole process, so that vendors, tenders, get feedback from the potential customers from the beginning, and they steer the solutions actually towards the right functionalities and performance that is needed. Another thing that helps innovative players is that they get the opportunity to test solutions possibly in multiple countries, because the EU-funded project always work with buyers groups, not just with one buyer, but with multiple buyers from different countries, who then typically also want to test solutions in their different countries. During the project, there can be deployment of limited set of solutions. Innovative tenderers can also get the first customer reference through these pre-commercial procurements, which helps them find customers for other bigger projects later. If we go to the next slide, You can see that this really has impact. If we look at all the projects that have been funded in the past, there have been already more since now. I should update the slide, but the figures always remain around the same. So yes, it is really opening a route to the market for new players. It more than doubles the amount of new players that win contracts. It also helps larger suppliers bring products to the market. They still win contracts. They can still participate, just like smaller ones. It also stimulates cross-border growth of companies. When we compare with typical average procurement contracts, it's a much larger amount of contracts that are won by bidders that have never worked with procurers from those specific countries before. And it helps creating growth and jobs in Europe, because one other requirement in our work program is that public buyers need to ask the winning contractors to do minimum 50% of the research and development activities for the pre-commercial procurement in the member states or associated countries. And what we see is they actually do almost all the R&D in those countries. If we go to the next slide, you can also see what impact does it have in the longer term. Yes, it helps commercialization of solutions. Contractors all tell us that it helps them commercialize their solutions 2 to 4 times faster than without having customers in the project. It helps them grow their business in terms of attracting other investments, growing their revenue, concluding partnerships with other companies, and some of them even are acquired or undergo a merger or go on the stock market to grow their business further. So going on to the next slide, does it help also public buyers? Yes, we see that 2 years after the projects, almost half of the procurers' projects have deployed solutions. It improves interoperability. Many procurers ask for solutions that are more interoperable in their tender specs than the ones that exist today. They also do effort to use pre-commercial procurements to remove supplier lock-in, and we see that afterwards, this really reduces costs and creates higher quality products. And we also see it helps reinforce our strategic autonomy. So ensure that public buyers are less dependent on solutions from outside of Europe, where they have no influence on the supply chain if there are disruptions in the supply chain, and there are more suppliers in Europe capable of delivering solutions to the public buyer afterwards. So we see really cases where, thanks to a pre-commercial procurement, like you see there on the right-hand side, this was a pre-commercial procurement to develop disinfection robots for hospitals many years ago, more than 10 years ago. The startup that created itself to participate in this pre-commercial procurement is now the world leader in this field worldwide. Same on the left-hand side, this was a procurement with larger companies also in it, where the Norwegian government wanted to go to more climate-friendly solutions, reduce CO2 emissions. They created the world's first and largest carbon capture, transport, and storage facility with pre-commercial procurements that started back in 2011. And now large industrial sites from around Europe have been connecting to it already. And the projections are that this whole project will reduce CO2 emissions significantly for the entire Europe. So you can really achieve big things, big impacts with projects, with pre-commercial procurement projects, and they are worth investing in. If we go to the next slide, here are some other examples. On the left, you see an example of supercomputing, where more than 15 years ago, Europe was not having any world-leading suppliers, but thanks to pre-commercial procurements and afterwards bigger procurements to deploy those solutions, we now have one of the best suppliers in the world in Europe, and we can compete again. We even created long-term joint procurement partnership between the public buyers, all the big public buyers for supercomputing infrastructure in Europe, by setting up a new entity, a joint undertaking for that is doing more than €1 billion of supercomputing procurements over the Horizon Europe period. On the right-hand side, you see also an example in the security field where critical communication infrastructure was created through a pre-commercial procurement to allow police, fire brigades, all kinds of first responders, defense, etc., to interconnect and talk to each other in moments of crisis. Because today that's not the case. We have non-interoperable systems across Europe, and it's difficult for them to work all together in a crisis situation. So this is being deployed today thanks to pre-commercial procurements from years ago that have created this common architecture together, common interoperable architecture. Going to the next slide. How does the funding work? You can go again to the next slide. Here, we're not talking about a call for just coordination activities. It's not a coordination and support action that supports only the preparation of a pre-commercial procurement. No, this call is for pre-commercial procurement actions, which can fund the preparation of a pre-commercial procurement, but not only, it also wants you to do an actual pre-commercial procurement during the project, one joint pre-commercial procurement by a transnational buyers group. And it funds both the activities of preparing and running the procurement and the actual procurement cost. What's important in a pre-commercial procurement action, you see that underlined there, is that the procurement cost, so how much you will buy, how much R&D services you will buy during the project, needs to be more than half of the total budget of the project. So the intention needs to be to have a sizable procurement to have impact. And that's different from coordination actions, which only fund preparation activities, but not actual procurement costs. So if we go to the next slide, who can participate? Like we said, in European funded projects, we cannot fund just one public buyer to do a pre-commercial procurement. We need to have in the project minimum 3 independent entities from 3 different member states or associated countries that participate. And minimum 2 of those need to be public buyers from different member states or associated countries. So who are then public buyers? Anybody who is a contracting authority or a contracting entity, as those terms are defined in the European Public Procurement Directives. So what does that mean? That's not only public authorities like national, regional, local authorities. No, it's also other types of public buyers, as already mentioned, ports, harbors, anybody who is having to follow public procurement rules when they buy standard products. They can also participate in pre-commercial procurements, and they are going to be considered as a public buyer. But there can be also other types of procurers in the project that are not public buyers. That can be NGOs or private buyers. You can have as many of those as you want, but we need to have the minimum of 2 public buyers to make the project eligible. So don't forget that. Who cannot participate in a project as beneficiary, as participant in the action? Those are the entities that want to be suppliers of the solutions. Those that want to win R&D contracts cannot be participating in the action. Why? Because otherwise we will have conflict of interests, where the suppliers who want to win the R&D contracts are going to be in the group of the buyers who define what needs to be procured. And then we get problems. So this is not possible. Of course, suppliers will be engaged by the public buyers as soon as the projects are selected and when they start, because then all the buyers will start doing open market consultations, they will start talking to suppliers, and they will start publishing afterwards a call for tender, which asks suppliers to make offers. We go to the next step, next slide. You see who can be the different type of entities in a project. First of all, we need a buyers group. We need some procurers, the public and possibly also private ones, that are going to implement the pre-commercial procurement. So that are going to actually hand out this procurement money to those that win R&D contracts on the market. we need one lead procurer. This buyers group needs to decide who will run the procurement in their name and on their behalf, because somebody, one of them, needs to publish the public procurement in his country's procurement portal and in the European tender portal. And then the procurement will happen under the legal framework of the lead buyer's country. And he will be therefore leading and coordinating the procurement, of course, in cooperation with the rest of the buyers group. Can there be other beneficiaries in a project? Yes, there can be other entities, as long as they're not suppliers, remember. Other entities, for example, that help the procurer in running the procurement, in preparing it, or third parties that provide in-kind contributions to the procurers. What can this be? Resources or test sites or equipment for testing, for example. And what can also happen is that the participants in the projects, the public buyers, for example, can use money from the project to give financial support to third parties, if that's foreseen in the call. That's, for example, to award prizes to third parties, or if the solutions need to be tested not only by public buyers, but by other end users or citizens on the market, then this financial support can be used to reward those third parties for taking the time to test solutions. Okay, if we go to the next slide, here you see a whole bunch of links where you can find more information. What I explained, the funding conditions for the call, they are all in this first link, general annexes of the work program. If you want to see what kind of grant agreement will I sign with the Commission if I win such a procurement project, you can look at the model grant agreement. It's based on the usual model grant agreement, but it has some modifications for the procurement projects in the articles that are mentioned there. There are also guidance documents that show how do I launch a pre-commercial procurement call for tender, how do I prepare a market consultation, frequently asked questions. Have a look also at the application form for the PCP actions. This whole form does not show up on the portal when you click to submit your proposal. It's good to download it and to have it next to you, because the application form gives you tips and tricks on how to prepare a good proposal. It says, don't forget to explain this under this evaluation criteria, because the evaluators will be looking for this type of information here. And the Horizon program guide gives some more general information on innovation procurement and on what is the definition of a public buyer. If you go to the next slides, what kind of activities are eligible to get funding for in PCP projects? Well, of course, the activities to prepare and manage the procurement, but also the procurement itself, like we said. But how does that go now in practice? Projects always start with a preparation stage. They need to prepare their procurement. They need to run the market consultation, prepare their tender documents, and create a joint procurement agreement. All the buyers in the buyers group need to agree who is going to do what in this joint procurement, who's going to be the lead procurer, who's going to test solutions, and so on. Once they have that all prepared, they will launch one joint pre-commercial procurement. The lead buyer will do that together. And then once that's done, then we really start with the execution stage of the project, because then they really start procuring the R&D services. They will evaluate all the offers together, and they will test in whichever countries had an interest in testing. It means they will go up to validation of the solutions and make sure that when you design the duration of your project, you're free to choose how long or how short it should take, but foresee sufficient time, not just for concluding the procurement, but also for testing and validating the solutions and to see that they really generate the impact that you wanted to have. You can, after that is finished, also foresee more time for publication of results, dissemination, and anything else you need to do to exploit also the results to ensure that they will generate larger effects afterwards. And that's, for example, the time when you can start preparing a follow-up procurement to deploy solutions at larger scale. So you can foresee in the project a deliverable and have that paid by the project these efforts to prepare or follow up larger procurement. If you need costs for testing, those are also eligible costs that you can put in the project budget table, but also things like contribution to standardization if that's needed, contribution to regulation, or if you need a regulatory sandbox to test things outside of the current regulatory framework, you can do that in a pre-commercial procurement. You just need to agree with the regulators then that they allow you to do that. If certification of solutions is needed, it can also be done. Asking for permits, training other end users that will need to use the solutions. You can include anything you need to bring the solutions to the market. Next stage, next slide shows this a bit more graphically so that the funding funds in the blue the procurement cost, but also in green everything around that to make sure that the procurement happens and that it will have impact afterwards. So the activities before that in the preparation stage and also the activities during the execution stage of the procurement to follow up, monitor the procurement, testing, etc., and activities even afterwards. What is the funding rate? The funding rate for pre-commercial procurement actions is 100% of all the costs, both the costs in blue and the costs in green. When do you get this money? You get pre-financing. So you get a first pre-financing amount at the start of the project before you start even the preparation stage. This pre-financing typically covers the cost of the preparation stage. And then once your tender specifications are ready, once a review has taken place with external experts, and you are really ready to launch a procurement, then you get a second pre-financing amount. There might be additional reviews during projects, because some projects really take quite some time. And then there's a final review and a final payment at the end of the project. So you don't have to finance the whole procurement upfront, there is pre-financing. If you go to the next slide, we also see what this funding can cover. So we're in the PCP actions, 100% of eligible costs are financed. So what are these eligible costs? As we said, both the price of the R&D procurement is eligible and the additional activities around it that were in the green on the previous slide, any in-kind contributions that other parties provide to the procurers, like testing sites, and even the VAT on the procurement cost is an eligible cost, unless, of course, beneficiaries can deduct it nationally, then we don't reimburse it. Remember that you design a project that the procurement cost must be minimum 50% of the total eligible costs. Do we reimburse indirect costs in these projects? Yes, they are reimbursed at 25%. So if you are preparing the procurement and the lighting in your office needs to be on for you to work, so you have some energy bills, yes, that is covered through 25% indirect costs that will go on top of your personnel costs that you put in the budget table. But there are no indirect costs on the procurement cost. So we just reimburse there the amount of money, the price that you pay to the vendors that did the R&D for you, but no indirect costs in that. Why? Because those costs will be included already by the vendors in their price of their procurement. Going to the next slide, you can see this a bit in a picture. This is now for a small pre-commercial procurement action. Yours will be bigger, 8 times bigger, because we're talking about a call of 40 million now. But here it shows that if you're going for a call and you want to propose a project of 5 million euro budget, you need to have minimum 2.5 million euro of your budget table budgeted for the PCP procurement cost and can only spend maximum the rest, the other 2.5 million, for other types of activities. So it means you need to divide this 2.5 million of minimum 2.5 million, but probably more of the procurement cost over these different vendors that you want to buy R&D from. So you should think already in our proposal, if I foresee X amount of budget, is that enough to finance more than one supplier in parallel to do all the activities that I want them to do solution design or prototyping or develop real products and really do field testing. make a sort of budget calculation of how much that would cost for one supplier, multiply it by the number of suppliers that you want to have in each of the phases that you want to cover, so that your budget estimation is realistic. And you know what kind of budget you need to ask us to do a project that will work. Going to the next slide, you see here what happens with the intellectual property rights. So like we said, in pre-commercial procurements, the tenderers, the contractors that will win research and development contracts from the public buyers, they will retain the ownership of their intellectual property rights. What rights does the public buyers then still have? Well, they can ask other rights, like, for example, a license-free rights to use the results for their own use. But could be also what we ask public buyers to foresee is rights to require the suppliers to grant licenses, non-exclusive ones, to other third parties on the market under fair and reasonable conditions when the public buyer really needs this. For example, this usually doesn't happen, but it can happen in emergency situations. For example, there is a pre-commercial procurement that developed new medicines against an upcoming pandemic. Then the pandemic happens, really, and the suppliers that develop the solutions in the pre-commercial procurement cannot produce sufficient solutions because there's suddenly such a huge demand. It's impossible for this limited set of suppliers to produce enough products. Then the procurer can ask the suppliers, okay, people are going to die if there are not more suppliers able to deliver the solution. So please grant a license to other suppliers on the market to produce the same thing for the duration of this pandemic here. There is also the callback right that we ask public buyers to foresee in their tender documents. What does that mean? Well, the whole reason why public buyers give the ownership of the intellectual property to suppliers is so that they would commercialize it, create the solutions, put them on the market, produce them, make them available to buyers, and use them for the purposes that the procurer wants them to use for. Now, what if they don't do that? What if they're failing to commercialize the solutions and the public buyer cannot buy them from any of the suppliers because none of them was able to produce them, or some of them were not able to produce them, or they abuse the results of the pre-commercial procurement against the public interest? Then the public buyer needs to be able to step in and say, okay, then I ask back these ownership rights, transfer them back to me so that I can give somebody else on the market a license to develop the solutions for my needs. We go to the next slide. You can see another interesting aspect of pre-commercial procurements, that is that you can start thinking about deployment already during the project. And there are different ways of doing that. One is to already buy a limited set of solutions if they were, of course, successfully developed during the R&D, already during the pre-commercial procurement. So you can already foresee a budget for that during the pre-commercial procurement. Another approach is to say, okay, I will procure solutions in a separate procurement after the pre-commercial procurement. Then you can already prepare this follow-up procurement during the project. But there are also situations where solutions can be deployed without needing any procurement. For example, if the solution that was created is an open source software, you just need to publish it and then anybody can use it afterwards without having to buy anything. There are also cases where the public buyers are not the ultimate end users for the solution, and then they can use project budget to give financial or regulatory incentives to other entities on the market to adopt the solutions. Now, if you are already doing deployment during the project, you may want to speed up your project because you need deployment to happen within the same duration. Then you can reduce the number of phases in the pre-commercial procurement, and instead of typical projects doing splitting the development and testing in 2 phases, phase 2 and phase 3. You can combine all of that in one phase if that is not too risky for the public buyers. If they think they still should have more phases to reduce the number of suppliers step by step, that's of course still possible. But if you want to speed up the project, you can do a fast-track pre-commercial procurement then and combine all development and testing in one phase. Going to the next slide, here are more links. We've done already larger webinars in the past about how to prepare a successful innovation procurement proposal. If you have more generic questions about projects in general in Horizon Europe, there are also webinars about that. Going to the next slide. I think this was my last slide, because the slides that follow now are just slides showing all the different calls in different work programs on different topics. But I guess you will be mostly interested in the one for the fuel cell technologies anyway, so we don't necessarily need to go into that now. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm always here to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Liv and Maria, for the very good introduction to this cold topic. It's not an easy one. We will now move on to the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and feel free to submit your questions at any time, and we will bring them into the discussion. There's already a couple of questions, and let's start right from the top. The first question would be, does domestic feedstock refer to EU 27 or also include sourcing from Horizon associated countries? A very specific question. I don't know if you want to answer to that one.
Thank you for the question. This is written in the topic, actually. So we try to do domestic production of the fuel in the EU and associated countries. So the topic says that they should be developed these value chains from based on domestic sustainable feedstocks across EU and associated countries. Okay, so the answer is yes. You can have feedstocks from EU and associated countries, EU 27 associated countries. But of course, one has to think about the logistics, about the business model, many things.
Thank you very much. Then the next question, from several providers, stated from the cold topic, is it fair to assume that more than one, in brackets at least 2 industrial value chains should be present in a consortium?
That I will answer it partially, and then I think Liv also could discuss about this multiple sourcing idea. In the topic, we put a list of industrial value chains for which competitive solutions need to be developed. My scope, my intention is to see more than one solutions being financed through the PCP. And I think from what Liv explained, it is also possible to do that with this multiple sourcing. But please, Liv, complement me or correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, indeed. In a pre-commercial procurement, the multiple sourcing is used to create competition, right, between different potential solution approaches from different tenderers to see which one will work best. So all the public buyers define one common challenge that they all want to address, for example, related to this processing of methanol, for example, for maritime applications. And then they go for that and they compare different solutions by doing multiple sourcing with different consortia. Now, if the public buyers say, actually, we all need to tackle 2 different challenges, That's also possible. Then they will create 2 different lots in their pre-commercial procurement, and then they will have competition for each lot with multiple suppliers competing per challenge. Sometimes these challenges are interlinked, and then you can even, as public buyer, impose requirements on that they need to collaborate or do joint testing at certain points in time. So basically everything is possible, but it's up to the public buyers to decide what they want to focus on, what they really need, and to design their procurement accordingly.
Thank you. I think the next question that we have in the Q&A, we have already received the answers to. It's about the value chain, if there's only one or if it could be multiple value chains. We just discussed this. The next question is the role of RTOs in this PCP. We have got the answer on that in your presentations already, I think. What level of commitment from large industry players is expected at proposal stage? Binding commitment versus expression of interest.
Yeah, do you want to answer that, Maria, or you want me to?
No, please, Liv, go ahead, because
if you mean with industry, the people who want to be suppliers, who want to make offers to pre-commercial procurements, I suppose that's what meant in the question. Then at the proposal stage, they don't need to make any commitment because they cannot be in the proposal, right? It's the public buyers with people helping them that will submit proposals. And the suppliers will only start making commitments once they will make offers for these procurements. Then, of course, in the offer, they will commit to do this and that for the public buyers at this and that price. So that's the short answer to that. If the answer is that I'm actually a private company, like an airport or a harbor, but I want to be a public buyer, then that is possible. Then you will not be creating solutions, but you will be submitting a proposal. And then your commitment in the proposal is that you are really motivated to do this procurement together with these and these other buyers, and you are willing to do a project of this size and that type of budget over this duration that you propose in the proposal.
Yeah. Thank you, Liv. I also think in the same way that if you are a supplier, then we have to follow what is in the call of tenders as industry. If you are a procurer, then your commitment is your time, is your efforts, is your alignment with the other buyers. Perhaps if you're a public authority, you can be also lead procurer. So that's the commitment that you need to do.
Thank you. And to the next question, are there military interest part of the scope?
Okay. We do not yet have the dual use. We do not work under the European Defence Fund. It's Horizon Europe. We do not target military use here. It's not written anywhere in the topic. I am not sure from a legal point of view if I can exclude it, but there's no focus in this area in the topic.
Then we move on to the next one. Could you clarify whether national research and innovation funding organizations, which are not themselves procurers but have extensive experience in managing public R&I programs, stakeholder mobilization, international cooperation and innovation ecosystems development, may participate as beneficiaries in the consortium? And if so, are there any specific limitations or expectations regarding their role and contribution within the project?
Yeah, it is possible. We've already had such projects in the past, and the typical role that they play is indeed helping to promote the market consultation and the call for tenders to possibly interested suppliers and research organizations, because they have these networks, right? or help the public buyers with preparing the procurement, because some of these research and innovation funding agencies have already national programs that support pre-commercial procurements nationally, so they have some expertise on that as well. So yes, it's possible.
Next question. If we work with professional technology developer to validate and improve the design to produce a commercially viable technology, would this qualify by the procurement criteria?
So I guess this is a question from somebody who wants to participate as supplier, right? Or winning an R&D contract. I mean, yes, the core requirements are clear, right? What the procurers need to buy is research and development up to TRL 8, if I remember well. It doesn't mean that you need to start at TRL 1 with fundamental research. The procurers will start looking at what is the current state of the art on the market. Okay, if solutions out there are already at TRL 4 or at TRL 6, all of them, then that's where they will start. So it depends a bit on the maturity of the market, where pre-commercial procurement start. But what I think is clear from the call is that we want solutions not to stop somewhere in the middle, but to go all the way up to TRL 8, so that solutions have really been developed to meet all the requirements of the public buyers. They are fully tested, validated, and they're even already deployed at small scale during the projects where possible. So I think you can indeed, to answer the question, end up with a commercially ready solution, because it can be already deployed, ready for real use during the project.
Indeed, the industrial value chains that are listed, and also, of course, it's open to other ones, they are close to TRL 7, most of them. They just need to be completed in order to go to a commercial solution. So I like also what Liv presented, that you can do a fast track, you can condense some steps of the phases and really concentrate on the later steps, which are going to the commercialization, the scaling up, the de-risking of this industrial technology. So certainly in this call, we don't start from TRL 1. We start from around, let's say, if I look at these value chains that are listed in the topic, around TRL 6, 7, depending on the value chain.
Then the next question, how does the supply chain selection interfere with Annex 9A and local implementations? Is there a one-way dynamic, or can the PCP development also influence Annex 9A listings? There's an additional explanation for this question. Restrictive regulation often favors incumbent solutions and blocks innovation. Is there a shortcut to regulation in order to lifting such regulatory blockades, either national or European, for desired solutions?
Okay, this is a policy question. We are having a technology now implementation topic. Feedstocks here that are eligible are those that are listed in Annex 9 of the Renewable Energy Directive. So I don't. This is not to influence, or not to influence, not to inform the RED consultation and RED revision, which is right now. It is just to implement compliant solutions with the RED Annex 9.
Yeah, to complement the question about the regulatory experimentation, I think I mentioned it briefly in my presentation, but let's check it again. So if during a pre-commercial procurement you develop something that is, wow, mega promising, but you bump into a problem to test it because the current regulations do not provide yet legal certainty to test this totally new thing because they didn't foresee this new innovation, when the regulation was written, or there is something which hampers you in the regulation from doing testing. You know, this whole topic does not provide you an automatic free pass to ignore regulations and to just start testing whatever you want. But if you bump into such a project during a pre-commercial procurement, you can, of course, go and talk to the responsible regulatory authorities. It will depend in which countries the public buyers are active in that project. You can explain to them, hey, we're having this issue for testing. Can you give us the permission to do this testing in a limited environment, controlled space under, safeguards that ensure sufficient safety and so on? And if they say yes, then you can do that during a pre-commercial procurement. But you need to then work together with these regulatory authorities to make it happen. And there are mechanisms for doing that. There are regulatory sandboxes as a mechanism, and several EU countries are already using them, are offering this possibility to researchers and suppliers to come and knock on the door and say, oh, I need to test something, but I need some regulatory assurance that I can test this thing.
The next question is, how many phases of the PCP tender are required?
Minimum 2. Like I said, if you want, you can condense all the development and testing in one phase, but where PCP is a phased approach, we need to have minimum 2 phases, and the first phase is then typically a feasibility study or the delivery of a first smaller amount of products before you go to the larger amount that you want to validate or test in the field. But it's up to the procurers to decide what exactly they want each phase to do and what are the technical requirements that they want to impose on vendors, to reach what type of maturity of solutions across different phases.
Is it mandatory to conduct an open market consultation?
Yes, that is a mandatory step for every EU-funded PCP.
Does the consortium of the de-risking pool have to also provide money to the PCP in addition to the EC money?
No, that's not mandatory because, like we said, the funding rate is 100%. So if you submit a project, you can go here in this call up to 40 million, if I understood well, right? And this budget is enough to do everything that you need. Then you don't need to invest any additional money on your own as public buyer. But you're always free, of course, to add additional money. If you say the 40 million is not enough, I actually want to test something that is even more expensive, you can always add additional budgets from other sources on top of the EU budgets that is provided to you.
Shall there be one or more pre-commercial procurements undertaken?
What I understood from Maria is that they're looking, of course, anybody can submit proposals, but they're looking to fund one project that consumes the whole 40 million of this topic.
This is true. That would be one project.
When defining the pre-commercial procurement need, is it defined for all 2 to 3 phases at the start or stepwise, for example, once the previous stage has been completed?
That's a good question. So the procurement need is defined from the beginning because it needs to be clear for bidders on the market what are they actually bidding for from the beginning. But the award criteria or the requirements can be specified in more detail step by step as the pre-commercial procurement progresses. For example, in the beginning, if you have a requirement, the solution needs to be secure, it needs to be durable, whatever it is. In the beginning, of course, in the first phases for projects that still start in TRL 3-4, they will be focusing on security in the design stage first, and then when the next phase comes, prototyping, the procurers will specify in more detail, okay, what does these reliability and security requirements now really mean when we need to have prototypes that need to be tested in the lab? So they will define them in more detail. And in the last phase, they will define even in more detail for how the security requirements and reliability requirements need to look like for testing and deploying them really in the field. So you should have a good idea of the requirements, what they are from the beginning, but they may become more specific during the project phase per phase.
Then to the next one, it likely will take time to mobilize public procurement consortia buyers groups, since in our experience, public parties do consider purchase of liquid fuels out of their scope. Have you got a reflection on this?
Yeah, indeed.
What is a public body? I think Liv can repeat what she said about who can be a public body as a procurer.
Yeah, indeed. It can be not only the typical public authorities, national ministry, regional authority, local city. It can be also entities which we consider are private companies, like energy companies, water companies, airports, harbors, whatever. But they are called public buyers because they are providing a service of public interest. Everybody is using airports, etc. So they have to follow also public procurement rules. And these entities are typically a bit faster and a bit more flexible in how they procure than the public authorities. So it will depend on which group of public buyers is starting a project, on how they actually go about and running their procurement. But all of them are buying R&D, and R&D is unpredictable anyway. So all of them will need to design their procurement so that they can handle this.
How can public procurers protect themselves from contractor side risks, such as budget, schedule overruns, and/or technology underperformance in the latest PCP phases?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I haven't talked much about this, but instead of just putting only award criteria at the beginning when you launch the call for tenders, and you just use this criteria to evaluate the offers, public buyers can also, and they are encouraged to also set performance indicators that tell the suppliers from the beginning, this is what we want to achieve in the end, and we will evaluate your project or your products or your performance based on these criteria at the end of each phase. And the decision on whether you have successfully completed the phase will depend on whether you reach these performance indicators. That's one way of managing these kind of issues, because the performance indicators can require a minimum level of quality, but also can have timing requirements, and you need to complete this phase within this amount of time. They can also have cost requirements, that the phase cannot run over this maximum cost. So that's a way of ensuring that your ultimate requirements are not overrun. But what you can do in addition to that is even you can reward suppliers or encourage them to do even better, to come with even better quality and even lower cost solutions, and solutions that are even ready faster than what you had indicated in your performance indicators. And then this is possible by using a technique called value engineering. How does that work? Then you describe from the beginning in your pre-commercial procurement documents, in your contract, that we want suppliers to come forward whenever they are working, still when the development is still ongoing, with ideas, proposals that could increase the quality, reduce the costs, or reduce the time to develop and test things even more than what they committed to in the beginning when they signed the contract. And if they do so, if they come with a proposal that is really fantastic, reduces costs even further, improves quality even more, does things even faster, then the procurer can even give them a financial incentive for that. He can reward them and say, okay, if you save me 1 million euro of costs on my product, then I give 500,000 of that cost savings to you, dear supplier, and I keep only 500,000 of the cost savings for me. So you can introduce this kind of financial incentives to encourage suppliers to do even better. This way, they can also bring in new innovations that only arrive in the market during the project and that they were not able to foresee when they made an offer, but that could speed up the project or increase its quality or reduce its cost.
If we want to procure biomass from agricultural fields for renewable fuel generation, what will be the procurement procedure?
Well,
Yeah.
this is part of the industrial value chain, so it will be part, let's say, it is included in the development of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe the question is, what procedure do I use if I want to run a pre-commercial procurement, right? Like we said, we need to publish it, right? So it needs to be a published procedure. But which one you use, we actually don't define in the Horizon Europe rules. So you can design your own procedure because, like I said, pre-commercial procurements do not fall under the EU public procurement directives, and they're typically in all countries also exempted from the national procurement rules. So there is no standard procedure for it. But so you have the freedom to design your own procedure based on existing ones or modifying them. If you don't need negotiation, you think you can do all of it with just writing a tender spec and evaluating offers, you can design a procedure similar to a typical open procedure. If you think you need negotiation, you can include that in the procedure. If you think my procedure, my project is sensitive, I cannot just publish procurement documents openly to everyone. I need to first pre-select suppliers and check that they are trustworthy to share documents with. You can also use, for example, a restricted type procedure, where you first, publish an expression of interest. You get you publish not immediately the full call for tender, but you ask vendors to express if they're interested to participate in the procedure. You pre-screen them and only send the full procurement documents to those who are trustworthy to participate in the procurement. So you are free to design your solution, your procurement procedure, the way you need it. But the only big requirement is that you need to publish a prior information notice for the market consultation and the contract notice for the call for tender.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your answers also to the questions. We're at the end of this webinar. I would like to ask Maurizio just to share the last slide again and to invite you all who want to continue the discussions and are interested in potential consortia building
Ernesto, can you share again the presentation at the beginning with the QR code, right?
Just the last slide, exactly. There you have the QR code again if you want to express your interest to be invited also in the following activities to this webinar, where we will facilitate matchmaking and discussions for consortia building for this core topic in the upcoming weeks. So this will be organized each Monday from next week on, with a slight break in the middle of the height of the summer holidays. So this is just to close today's webinar and invite you all to express your interest to build consortia for this core topic. Thank you very much for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.